Okay, let's talk about, was Rivka actually married when she was 3? There's a number of religions discussing this. But as a Yid, as a Jewish person, what do we believe? What does it actually say? What are the correct opinions? What's going on? I think this is pretty interesting. It's something that I've always kind of had in the back of my mind, but let's deal with the problem first. Where's this whole problem start with? Well, it's a Rashi, famous Rashi. It's the pasuk, the verse that talked about Yitzhak marrying Rivka when he's 40. Says Rashi, right? When Avram came from Har HaMoriah, the mountain of Moriah, Nisbaser, right? He's told Shenoda Rivka, the Rivka was born. Now Yitzhak was 37 years old. Why? Shaharei boy beperek mesa Sarah, because Sarah Imenu writes, Sarah died when the Akedah, when the sacrifice happened. Umishanoilid Yitzhak ad Akedah shmesa Sarah lamed zayin shana hayu, and there's 37 years from when he's born until the Akedah, until the sacrifice. Why? How do you know that? Because she was 90 when she gave birth to Yitzhak, that it says in the Torah, and she's 127 when she dies. So if she dies at the Akedah, so 37 years, that's how old Yitzhak is. Now, at that time, says Rashi, Ubay beperek noda Rivka. At that time, Rivka was born. Himtin la ad shetei rui labia shleisha shanim. So Avraham, right, waited 3 years before sending his servant Eliezer. Why? Because he heard about her being born, and he waited 3 years until she's appropriate for, marital relations, and then they would get married. So this is a very odd Rashi to anyone, right? Many Jews, right? All Jews should be learning Rashi on Chumash. That's how important he is. And I'm sure many of them have gotten to this and been bothered. Now, to myself, I had a very simple explanation, which I'll give you in 1 second. But here's the thing. Is this correct? Is this, what the rabbis think? Is this what you think as a Jewish person? What is going on with this Rashi? Well, first of all, let's deal with if Rashi's right. Meaning, what do I mean if Rashi's right? If the way we're reading Rashi is correct. I don't think it is. But if we're going to read Rashi this way, and this is what Rashi means, that she got married when she was 3, well, what is that going on? Well, first of all, so this other religion, right, has a little bit of a problem that their leader married a 6-year-old and was intimate with her when she was 9. Well, Yitzhak didn't really pick his spouse. Not like that religion. These two religions, don't bother. This is the simplest thing. I don't even want to mention that religion, but, he picked his wife. Here, Yitzhak did not pick his wife. Now, you'll say, well, Eliezer, the servant, brings her back. First of all, a non-Jew picked the girl. So you can blame anyone. It's a non-Jew, technically, right? Now, he picked her. Why? Because he prayed that someone's going to feed the camels or give water to the camels, and it all of a sudden happens. Now, Yitzhak was willing to give up his life because he was told to, right? Avram told him, this is what Hashem said, so he just did it. Yitzhak has the personality that he's willing to give up himself and what he believes and what he wants to what God wants, to what he's told to do. So, here's the situation. He's brought a girl. Maybe he would never pick her. It would never be on his mind. This is not a 3-year-old. But what can I do? Now, it doesn't say anywhere that he's having marital relations with her when she's 3. For sure not. They only have a kid 20 years later. So it could be that for 20 years they weren't intimate. Just because a person's married does not mean that they do all the married things. So that's the way I understood Rashi. Very simple. That Yitzhak is gonna have, Now, even if she's 3, and even if they are just legally married, right, not actually intimate, still, it could be why the Torah doesn't actually tell us not her age when she's born and not her age when she dies. There's nothing written about her age because the Torah is saying pretty much that this is really not something to look up to. It's not something positive. This was something that was absolutely necessary to be done, and we'll see why soon in a little bit. But maybe there's a reason that God would never have done this except he had no choice, quote unquote. Okay, so I think that's a possibility going through here. Now, I think it's also worth mentioning the Gemara in Kedushin, and also brought down in Shulchan Aruch, that it's usher, it's prohibitive l'adam lakadosh bitoy, to marry off his daughter kashi katana when she's a little girl, ad shetisgadol, until she gets older. V'taimer b'pleini ani reitze, like this person I want. Meaning, if she doesn't have the knowledge to be able to really marry, so you can't marry her off. it's not correct. It's usher, it's prohibited. And whether you're dealing with, maybe this is like extenuating circumstances, and maybe there's a situation where, it's okay, and we'll see that this could be one of those kinds of situations, in fact, and you'll see what I mean. But nevertheless, this is the halacha. It's usher, it's prohibited. You can't do it. All right, now I have my own answer, by the way, which will explain how pretty much everyone's misreading this Rashi. I think it's correct. I am biased a little bit, and we'll deal with that at the end. But first, I want to deal with the dissenting opinions, right? How many rabbis disagree with Rashi? Okay, so if you look up Yavamas Samech Aleph Amud Beis, right, it talks about a Nara, a young girl, which also Rivka is a young girl, quotes that pasuk. Now, Nara usually means 12. So how can you say 3? How can you say she's 3? Now, on this Gemara, they quote a different Gemara in Yavamas. And the Ramban, for example, says she was 14, right? Clear, he says 14. And the Seder Olam, who says 3, well, it's arguing against all the other rabbis, the Sifri and our Gemara. Now, to give you an idea, the Seder Olam, as far as I understand, is a Tana, right? That means, let's say, around 2,000 years ago. Sifri is also 2,000 years ago. Gemara, not as old, right? So these are the sources that we're dealing with. And the Ramban says she's for sure 14. Yes, there's opinion she's 3. And he holds, don't change it. Don't change it to 14. Why? Because how do you know? Meaning it says 3, you're just going to change it to 14? Even though he agrees it's 14, but don't change the text. Our Gemara, the Sifri, it's just an argument. How do you know it's not an argument? Differing opinions. And Tosfos quotes Rav Shmuel Chassid of Speyer, right, this is really before the Ramban, who actually says, no, we should change it to 14. We should change it to 14, it's a mistake. And it seems like that's what Tosfos holds. I mean, the Rashba and Ritva go like the Ramban, she's 14. Tais Rabbeinu Peretz goes, she's 14. Tais Rosh also goes 14, except he holds like the Ramban, don't change it. So, already you're seeing all the major rabbis, like all of them, after Rashi, are saying she's 14. Now, why are they saying that? Because they saw Rashi say 3, and so they're saying, no, it's 14. Now, the rabbis before Rashi, it seems like there's no real opinion that I didn't find one that she's 3, to be honest. It could be that no one argued this. It's only once Rashi said it, now they're arguing against him, but until then, everyone held she was 14. Okay, so let's deal with the sources, the 2,000-year-old source, the Sifri, that says 14, because it does a lot of mathematics, but it's a very simple source. It says in the Sifri in Zois Bracha at the end of the Torah, right, it says 6 pairs have the exact same sets of years. Different years, but they have 6 pairs, and each pair has the same set. And one of them is Rivka and Kahas. Now, we know Kahas was 133 years old when he died, so that's how we know Rivka was. Now, let's do a little bit of math, says the Ramban. If Yitzhak got married when he was 40, he had kids when he was 60. Yaakov, when his mother died, was 99. How do we know? We know that he was 99 because he stole the brachas, he stole the blessings when he was 63. He ran away immediately and was in the house of Shem and Aver learning Torah for 14 years. And then 20 years he was in the house of Lavan, and 2 years on his way back. And so he's 99 at this moment. Now, this is the moment when Rivka dies. Like it says, Alon Bachus, the place of cryings, plural. Why? Because it's not just the wet nurse of Rivka that dies, but it's Rivka herself also at the time who dies. Meaning there's 2 cries. Cry for the wet nurse and Rivka. This is what the sages say. And so now, if you're going to do the math, right, which is very easy. So if Yitzhak got married when she was 3, and 20 years later she has Yaakov, and then you add 99 to that, because that's when she dies at 99 years of age of Yaakov. So then it's only going to be 122. Where's the 133? You're missing 11 years. So says the Ramban, therefore, you have to say she was 14 years old when she got married. Add the 11 to the 3. She wasn't 3. Add the 11, and she's 14 years old when she got married. Case closed. And so many rabbis quote this, and they go with this. Why? Because it's very bothersome to say she was 3. And how can Rashi say that? And we'll deal with that. Okay, what's the Gemara as well that they bring up proof? So I don't want to go through the whole Gemara. The Mishnah pretty much says someone gets married to someone, they can't have kids. You know what the Bryce is going to say in a slightly different version. Says the Bryce, Nasa isha v'sha ima eser shanim. Let's say a man marries a woman and he's with her for 10 years. Ve'lo yalda, and they don't have kids. Yaitzi, he has to get divorced. V'yitein ksuva, and he has to give, right, when they got married, they made a ksuva, meaning that if they get divorced, he's going to pay her, let's say, $80,000, right, roughly $100,000, something like that nowadays. But whatever it was, right, it was a lot of money. So they have to get divorced. Now, she can get married to someone else, the Mishnah says, but he doesn't. Why? Because because maybe he won't merit to have children from her. So he has to get married to a different lady. Even though there's no proof to this rule. You see a hint in the Torah. Why? Because it says, at the end of 10 years of living in Canaan, right, the land of Israel, he is forced to, let's say, by Sarah, he's forced to marry Hagar. What does this come to teach you? Right? Living outside of Israel doesn't count for the 10 years. Why? Because I guess it's a lower, whatever, spiritually, whatever it is, maybe you don't deserve to have children, whatever it is. You have to, first of all, live in for this 10-year countdown to seem to start. Also, Lefikach, it says, therefore, chalahu, if he gets sick or she gets sick, or they're both, let's say, in prison, meaning there's natural reasons they're not having kids, not because she is infertile or he's infertile. It's whatever, they're not able to. Doesn't count for the number. So the 10 years only counts for, like I said, where you're expecting you should be having kids and that they're not. Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman, I have a big problem, says Rava. Why? Leilef mi Yitzchak. Why don't you learn, instead of from Avraham 10 years, learn from Yitzchak? Why? Because Dechsiv, it says, V'yi Yitzchak ben Arbi Mishana bekachtois Rivka. He was 40 years when he took Rivka. Uksiv Yitzchak ben Shishim Shana beledes Oisam. And yet there were 60, or he was 60 when they were born, right? Esav and Yaakov, Jacob and Esav. So, you see, he married her and he was married for 20 years. Now, every rabbi pretty much says, I don't understand. If she was 3 years old, then what's the argument here? What's the questioner thinking? He's thinking, we're talking about a regular man, a regular woman, and they have a 10-year countdown. So, you want to bring a proof from Yitzhak? Well, if she's 3, there's a reason why for 10 years, you're not going to count those 10 years because she can't have a kid. So say all the rabbis, the person asking this question, the Gemara, meaning Talmud Bavli, but certainly Rava, they hold that she wasn't 3, meaning she was 14. She was able to have kids, and yet they still waited 20 years. They still waited 20 years. So have a countdown of 20 years, right? Isn't that what the Gemara says? Pretty much every rabbi I saw, Rishon, and who addressed this issue, they bring this Gemara because it's quite clear, and they obviously get to go with the Bavli anyway. And Rav Nachman answers, Amar Le, right? He doesn't say, oh, she was 3. She says, Amar le Yitzchak agur, he was infertile. Meaning, why does a man divorce his wife after 10 years? Because he can't have kids with her. He's supposed to do the mitzvah of having kids, and he can't with her. So she'll marry someone else. Maybe they'll be able to have kids, but he'll have to marry someone else or take a second wife, whatever it is. But the Gemara, the Brisa here is talking about divorce. But if Yitzchak can't have kids no matter what, what's going to help marry someone else? He can't have kids. Now, based off of this Gemara, by the way, how do you know how does he know he can't have kids? How do you know that? Right? That's the whole point, I think, part of the point anyway, of this 10-year countdown. So I think the answer is as follows. Either God told him, or he had a physical issue, which means that, I don't know how far that physical issue goes, but he understood that he can't be intimate. Now, this sounds crazy, by the way, but even according to the opinion that I just told you, or the possibility I just told you, that God told him he can't have, he won't be able to have kids, so then why would he be intimate with Rivka, right? It doesn't make sense, right? So remember I told you when she was 3, even according to opinion, when she was 3, well, maybe he waited 20 years. Yeah, because he knew he couldn't have kids anyway, so why is he going to be intimate with her? You understand? So now, by the way, just to be clear, I'll give you a little bit of support for this right now. It says that Yitzhak, right? Rashi quotes that Yitzhak became blind at the Akedah. Why? Because the tear came into his eye and he became blind. Meaning, I think the real meaning of that, although there might be a physical meaning to that as well, but the reason why that all happened is because at the Akedah we understand that it's like Yitzhak actually was sacrificed. He became disconnected from his body. He was willing to give up his body to God, and he became like actually disconnected from his body. He was like a spiritual person who happened to have a body. Like he's this contradiction, this walking contradiction. This comes up many times in Torah, that Yitzhak is like alive but dead, but not really. Like, what's going on here? Even his name, right? They say like Yitzhak is short for Kates Chai, like the end, but he's alive. Like it's done, but he's alive. So I don't want to get too into it, but you can understand how he's disconnected from the physical world. Yeah, so that means that he's not going to be maybe intimate with his wife, meaning that's not the relationship exactly that they're going to eventually maybe. Once he can have kids or whatever it might be. So it's very easy to say this. Now, could also just be that he's very simple, infertile, and therefore he doesn't have to get married. I'm just adding on here a little bit. That maybe you'll argue I shouldn't add on. Okay, now Seder Olam, right, which is quoted as supporting Rashi. What does it say? It says, Yitzhak haya keshenagar al mizbeach ben lamed zayin shana. Yitzhak was 37 years when he was brought as a sacrifice on the mizbeach, on the altar. V'yagar, then it says, V'yagar, by the way, I'm going to skip this middle part because I'm going to tell you how I assumed it would have been read. He was 37 when he was on the altar. Boy beperik nolda, right? We're going to skip this whole 2 lines here for just 1 second. Boy beperik nolda Rivka. At that moment, Rivka was born. At what moment? When he was 37. Nimsa avinu Yitzhak nasas Rivka bas shleisha shana. So therefore, he married her when she was 3 years old. Right? That's how I assumed it would be read. But this is the middle part. What's going on here? So it says Yitzhak when he was 37 when at the Akedah. Now, it also says V'yagar Avram beretz plishtim yamim rabim. He lived in Plishtim many years. How many years? Yamim halalu merubim al shal Chevron. These are more years than Chevron. Shahayu esrim v'chamish shana, which was 25 years. What's more? 26. V'halalu esrim v'shish shana. Now, by the way, this is before the Akedah. So, is this a timeline? What's like going on? The Akedah is 37. Oh, and by the way, 26 years he was in Eretz Plishtim. Like you're going back in time now? And then it says, at that moment, Rivka was born. At what moment? Are we going back to the Akedah, or we're saying at that moment, in Eretz Plishtim, he was born? So, says the Gra and the Aruch Laner, yeah, Yitzhak was actually 26 at the Akedah, or at the very least, whatever, I don't want to get too much into the Cheshbon, 26 at the time of Eretz Plishtim, either way, however you want to read it. And even Rashi agrees that, well, I wrote here 14 years, but it's really 12 years before the Akedah. Meaning, if you read it, when it says that she was born at that time, it's talking about Eretz Plishtim, which is about 12 years, give or take, or 14 years, however, before the marriage or before he hears about it. Okay, I don't want to get too far into it. But the point is that this is about 12 years, and I have the Rashi here, right? It says, Harei Chav Vav Shana is 26 years. And he says, Yitzhak, and this was how many years before the Akedah of Yitzhak when you sacrificed Yud Beis Shanim, right? 12 years according to Seder Olam. And then you add the 3 for after the Akedah until he got married, so you get 15 years. So she would be around 15, give or take, right? Because of birthdays, whatever, the calendar, how it lines up. So now we have Rav Shmuel Chassid from Spire, quoted by Tosfos as saying, let's change it to 14. Now we have the Gra saying, doesn't it make sense, 14? And now I'm reading it to you, and the Aruch Laner reading it to you. It sounds like, yeah, you could easily say she's 14 when they get married, meaning that proof, that source that she was 3, it's 14. Now, a lot of the rabbis, like I said, they say don't change it from 14 to 3. Why? Now, one option is maybe they didn't have whatever the copy in front of them. They had heard that is what it says, and whatever it might be, and so they didn't want to change it. It also could just be, what's the proof? Now, my reading, it seems simple, right? Especially according to the Gra, and maybe I wouldn't say it on my own, but once it's already said. But now I'll add you even more. The Ravid has in his version 14 years. He lives in the 1100s before Tosfos, right before the suggestion to go from 3 to 14. He has it as 14 already in his version. He has a commentary on Sifri that we have, and in the commentary in Sifri, which mentions the calculations and everything, he brings down that, in Seder Olam it says 14 years. And that works out well with this calculation. So now we've like ripped up the whole source of 3 years. What opinion is there that she's 3 years now? Rashi, like, he's arguing against everybody now. Now there is going to be some support for him, but let's wait a minute for that. Now the Ramban on Chumash, by the way, says, Sarah doesn't die at the time of the Akedah. Yes, he admits that there's a medrash, but you see there's many ways of arguing now with the whole thing, because even if she was born at the time of the Akedah, it doesn't mean Sarah died yet, and if Sarah didn't die, doesn't mean that they got married yet and all the rest of it. So there's many ways of dealing with this calculation. The Chizkuni, who usually defends Rashi or explains Rashi at the very least, he says, like 14 with the Sifri, right, doing that whole calculation. And he even says in Seder Olam that it says that she was born. It says, really, Shenoda Kvar. She was already born. What do you mean already born? Now, we said at that moment she was born. Maybe he was talking about Medrash Rabbah or talking about a different Medrash, or maybe he's so bothered by it he wants to change the Seder Olam in a different way. Now he says, V'raila davar, as far as I recall, and I wrote down here, maybe I'm mistaken, I don't know, but he wants to pretty much prove that she's 14 and not go with Rashi and defend Rashi here. Now he says, V'raila davar, nikral narav, nishal espia, right? Now he gives another proof. Why? He says, in the story, it says that Rivka's brother and mother, they say, bring her and let's ask her if she wants to get married. And Rashi says on that, yeah, Shein Mesinas Gedolah Medaita. When you're going to marry someone, even an adult girl, you have to ask her if she actually wants to get married. You can't just marry her off or argue, oh, yeah. No. We have to make sure she actually wants to get married. So says the Chizkuni, okay, so Rashi himself is saying that we're talking about an adult. Now, I'm just going to jump into the mind of Chizkuni if I could. I think what he's saying is if she was a kid, well then, how do you prove to anyone else? Maybe we have to ask her because she's a kid. How do you prove about adults? Maybe adults you don't have to ask. So he says, the fact that Rashi's learning from this, that even adults you have to ask, means that we're talking about an adult, right? It's obvious you have to ask a kid, but what about an adult? I think that's what the Chizkuni is arguing. Das Akanim also mentions that she was, going to be 14, but 11 years before the Akedah was born. Now he says, interestingly enough, now this is a side point, but I think it is interesting, and you see that the commentaries are grappling over all the different things connected, right? So when they're saying 14, they're saying their whole view of Torah, all of these things seem to say 14. So he says, Rav Moshe Shloime bar Avram, who's named, I think, the Anzimun, I don't know exactly. So he says, there's a rule that we learned from Rivka that someone who's 12, we give her an extra year, meaning she gets engaged and we wait an extra year until they actually are married properly. And I think the minhag in Yisrael was back then, or for a long time, was everyone would get this extra year. But nevertheless, the point is we learn it from Rivka. But if Rivka's 14, she's no longer a Nara. Nara is technically someone from 12 to 12 and a half. So what's going on here? He's saying, I understand she's 14, but how do you prove then that someone 12 to 12 and a half is going to get... Now, he leaves it as Sarachian, like he doesn't know what's the answer. It needs some work on it. But nevertheless, he doesn't say she's not 14. Certainly not 3, that's for sure. But now, the Hadar Zakanim has an interesting answer. He says that the family was mistaken. They wanted to give her an extra year because they thought not just a 12-year-old gets an extra year, but every girl gets an extra year. Like I said, that was like the minhag, I think, amongst Jews. Many times they'd have the extra year or more or whatever it might be. And she answered them, no, that's for a 12-year-old. But I've already been waiting to get married for more than a year, and Sean, let me just go and be done with it. Now, the Ramban explains that there's 2 other options, by the way. One option is, in fact, that Nara is still not just 12 to 12 and a half, but she can remain a Nara even longer if she doesn't have physical signs of maturity, and therefore she could be 14 and still be called a Nara, and you can learn from her to all Naras that they get an extra year. Also, he says it could just be your math is off because maybe, Rivka didn't die at Elon Bechus, even though she's 14, and so okay, maybe she's like 12 and a half or something like that. Now, the Tur says, like the Ramban, she's 14, but he does ask a question. If she's 14, why did Yitzhak wait 20 years to daven for a child? So, first of all, I could answer he doesn't leave an answer, but I'm answering on my own. Well, maybe he waited at least 10 years before ever actually trying to consummate the marriage. And once it's tried to be done, so then you have 10 years. But until then, there's no reason to start praying. Like, how do you know anything's wrong? Or, of course, like we said before, he's an akar, he's infertile, and therefore he didn't need to divorce. So the 10 years, there's no like limit. He could have just gone 30 years. He could have gone, but at one point, obviously Rivka wanted to have kids, or he thought they need to have kids, whatever it is. That would be my answers. But cotton is the idea, of course. Okay, says the Chida, Medivrei Rav Yeshaya Hanizkeres Haraladas Tigirsa Seidolam Bas Yudal Jan. So he says, it's clear that according to this opinion, right, Rav Yeshaya, which I don't think we brought so far, but the Chida brings it, that yeah, she was 14 in Seder Olam. That's the correct way to write it over there, not 3. And he was, Yitzhak was brought up on the sacrifice when he was 26. Yeah, very good. Now, he does say that there's a medrash that she was 3, but he holds, they're arguing, but he's saying Seder Olam says 14. Yeah. And that's the way he holds. Abarbanel says she wasn't 3, and the fact that it says she was 3, it's for a different idea. You're missing the point, he says. They were, when you write a medrash, sometimes it's not to be taken literally every single point. It's trying to convey a message. Like, tortoise and hare, they didn't actually run. It's trying to convey a message. And so that's the same thing over here. It doesn't explain what the message is, but nevertheless, that's the way he understands it, or at least I didn't see him explain. Maybe that was my fault. I didn't keep reading. Okay, what about the supporters of Rashi? So the Gur Aryeh, who I think always supports Rashi. He always explains it. Whenever I look up a Gur Aryeh, it's always in support of Rashi, as far as I know, but I haven't learned them all. Nevertheless, he says the word Nara implies that she was a Nara, meaning she was 12. And you don't call a 3-year-old a Nara, he says. But he says, maybe of Reha, right, her limbs, Vigido Shala Kanar. Her limbs and her growth was like that of a 12-year-old. And now he just tacked on over here that, he also shows that, he's bothered by this idea of a 3-year-old being married. By Amnima Hameshamshin Bekatnus, right, to be involved with a cotton, to a child. Ma'ak Vanessa Gula holds back the Gula. Maybe Yitzhak is different because he's infertile, like maybe it doesn't apply to him. Like he's like bothered by this whole thing. Like that's what I'm trying to explain to you, that yes, it's okay to be bothered. Pretty much all the rabbis are bothered. None of them want to even the ones who defend Rashi are bothered by it. So what's the Gur Aryeh's explanation? I think the Gur Aryeh's explanation is she looked like a 12-year-old, or however old she was, 12 and a half or whatever it was. Meaning, even if she was 3, but if you looked at her, you would have no clue. You'd have no clue. Eliezer comes and sees this lady. He thinks she's 12. He doesn't think she's 3. Yitzhak, he sees her. So now that's an interesting question, right? Like, so now you're thinking, how could he be married to a 3-year-old? No one in the world would think she's 3. She looks like, whatever it is. That's a very odd answer. And it seems somewhat miraculous and very odd. It's hard to understand personally, but that's the Gur Aryeh, meaning that's the only way to understand Rashi going to Gur Aryeh. Taisus Yavamas to make it work with the text, Taisus Yavamas 64a says, like on Taisus 64.1b, that they're arguing, and it seems like he holds 14, but he says that there is the possibility, defending this idea of 3, that, maturity happened much quicker back then, and I would argue that that's probably, he's saying like the Gur Aryeh, that she looked like a 12-year-old. The Mizrahi says the Gur Aryeh's idea that she was physically and mentally and like spiritually like a 12-year-old. And he says, no, for sure not. That's not how to understand the story. But he goes through all these challenges and then he says, must be that, yeah, she was physically and mentally and, spiritually or whatever you want to say, like a 12-year-old. And then it must be right. Meaning he's backed into a corner and this is the only option he has. That's what it sounds like. But he does say the Gemara and Midrashim are arguing about her age. And therefore, it sounds like he wants to lean that way, that she's 14 as well, as far as my memory serves. And by the way, it could be that if you'd ask the Gur Aryeh, do you think she was 3 or 14? He might say 14. But in his defense of Rashi, he's saying that she looks like a 12-year-old. Okay, now Mishnah Seifrim. Mishnah Seifrim, I did bring down someone's translation here. I don't agree with it. I think it fills in a lot, and it's very important when you're reading something to know what it actually says and what someone's filling in to make sense. So the Mishnah Seifrim, I'm going to try and translate it not exactly literal, but pretty close word to word. Bas shalosh shanim, she was 3 years old. Veshalosh shayamim, and it puts in brackets because maybe you have it, maybe you don't. But 3 years and 3 days. Haisa Rivka was Rivka, kashiyasas mbeis avia, when she left her father's house. Shechein darchan, that's the way shel malachim of kings, and her father was a king. Some opinions say that. That's the way of kings. Kishetoylid lahen bas, when they have a daughter, min hagen lishmoya lachar shleishim yamim. The way is to hear about it 3 days after. It's like a little bit funny. I guess they're not there at the birth, so 3 days after they'll hear that they had a child. Ulevi shloishma avia, since her father did not hear. Ulakach, therefore, right? Because he didn't hear. Therefore, Nasalanes, a miracle was done for her. Shaloi Titma, she shouldn't be defiled. Shekach Hayam in Hagen. This is their way of the Aramaim. I don't know how to say that in English. The Aramians. I don't know exactly. But anyway, this was their way. Lishkoivim b'noisein, disgusting. They would sleep with their daughters, basulois that were physically pure, let's call it, meaning they didn't have intercourse. V'acher kach mesinoisen, and then they would marry them off. Al shem dechsiv, and this is, some people have this version, this part of the version or not. Al shem dechsiv, that's why it says v'ish lo yada, that a man did not know her. Ve'ini shalavia, and we don't just mean any man, we mean her father. Her father didn't know her. So I would, now maybe that's part of Mishnah Sefer, maybe not. This Mishnah Sefer is very odd. First of all, it's just using a logical argument based off of a tradition that this is what they did, right? It's not based in the Torah at all. So already that's kind of funny. Now, especially use the Arbar Benel that is trying to get a point across. It's not necessarily, but by the way, if you go with this Mishnah Sefer, you're going to see an amazing thing. Now you understand, at least according to the opinion that she was 3, you can understand that Hashem had to get her out of there, right? Why? Because if he didn't get her out of there, then her father was going to be intimate with her. So now what was the miracle, by the way, Hashem did for her? The miracle is brought down, I think, in Yalkut Shmoini, but Rashi brings it as well, that Besuel doesn't want her to go, and so he puts poison in the food, and he asks Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, right, why don't you eat? Let's eat together. And an angel comes and switches the plate, so Besuel dies. Her father dies. That's the miracle that was done for her, to save her from him. That's interesting. But what's odd is, because he was not, right, if you read the Medrash very carefully, right, and this is very important to do, and I'm going to leave this as a question, we'll come back to it, but what does it say? Because he didn't hear about her birth, therefore a miracle was done for her. Why? What makes her so special? Because her mother didn't say something, so she is going to have a miracle for her. So maybe you'll say yes. I'm going to leave this as a little bit of a question mark, and I'm going to come back to it. I think I have a good answer. I think. Oh, my answer. Okay, so first of all, before I tell you my answers, there's a number of obvious challenges. First of all, why doesn't Avram tell Eliezer about the age of the girl, right? He hears that his daughter-in-law was born, and he waits 3 years, according to Rashi, so why doesn't he tell Eliezer that she's 3? Wouldn't that make it pretty clear that this is the right girl, that you're looking for a 3-year-old? Or tell her the name. Tell him her name. Now, maybe he doesn't think Yitzhak is actually marrying her. We'll come back to this in a second. Now, Rashi says she was a basula v'ish lo yada, means that she didn't have marital relations with anyone, not in the normal way and not in an immoral way. She was pure, absolutely pure. Okay, so she's 3 years old. Like, that's so special, right? Even if she's 4, like, I don't understand what's so special. How does that show the righteousness that the Torah is going to write a whole verse about it and how important it is, according to Rashi? What's going on here? Now, also, it says Eliezer was mishtoi. He was like aghast, the fact that he prayed that someone's going to come and feed his camels. And all of a sudden, he goes to the well and she's feeding, or whatever, giving water to the camels. And all of a sudden, it happens. Now, he says, Rashi, he still doesn't know if this is the right girl. Is this from the family of Avram or not? Why doesn't Rashi say? He's amazed that there's a 3-year-old doing all these things. Now, it also says, V'nishal Aspia, we mentioned this, I think the Chizkuni brought down. So, even Rashi apparently is going to say that we learn to other adults that we need them to know, that we need to know that they want to marry this man. Also, when it says she's carrying the jug, Rashi mentions on her shoulder. It's a 3-year-old carrying a jug, gallons of water to feed camels. And Eliezer asks to sleep at their home, right? He says, do you have place? Like, why are you asking a 3-year-old? Like, it's like the whole thing is so strange. So odd if she's 3. Like, the whole thing doesn't make sense. And yet, Rashi says it. So, let's first of all look at one of the medrashes. And when I looked it up, I was amazed. I was amazed no one says it. It bothers me that no one's saying this. And it seems so obvious as an answer. So you tell me if you like the answer, please. But it says, in the medrash, right here, in Bereshis Rabbah, right? It's going to say as follows. That it's like cold water to like a broken soul, right? It's so nice. Cain, similarly, Shmua Toiva, a good news, Me'eretz Merachik, from a distant land. And we're talking about Ze Avram. This is Avram. Why? Sha'achu Bahar Moiriya. When he was on the mountain of Moiriya, Nisbasar, he was informed, right? He was told, Shenolda Zugasoi Shal Benoi, that his daughter-in-law was born. Hadahu Diksiv, that's what it says. Hine Yalda Milka. Okay, fine. Now, is that so interesting? But the Medrash continues with another opinion. V'achar dvarim, after these things, what things? It says, Hirhure dvarim, right? He had thoughts. So Avram had thoughts. He says, Ilu meis bahara Maria, right? If my son would die, right, he would be without children. Hashama said, so what am I going to do? I'm going to marry her off to Eshkol, Mamre, right? They're good people, right? Why should I care about Miyuchas? The family should be connected to the family. So Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu, God says to him, Einat atzarech, don't worry so much. Kvar noilad zugal shel Yitzchak. Already was born the mate of Yitzchak. And it says, right, Malka gave birth, was a Gamhi, right? And the Medrash continues, just like, she's going to have 8 kids and her co-wife is going to have 4 kids. So too, by you, it's 8 and 4. And it's a good family match. Right? There's a lot of parallels between your families, and this is going to be a good match. All right. So now I underlined very important differences. Now you can stop, you can pause, and just try and work it out for yourself. I don't know, it might be a good problem to work out, maybe not. So first of all, the first one says Shmua Tova. He heard something good, and it says Me'eretz Merchaik, from a distant land, and yet this one says he heard it from God. And this one says Nizbaser Shenoda Zugas Shel B'nai, that he was informed that his daughter-in-law, right, was born, meaning that this girl was born. Now, by the way, he might not have been told, oh, your daughter's been born, or daughter-in-law, sorry, has been born. He might have just been told that, this distant family member had a kid. Wish them a mazel tov. And then when he's having these thoughts, or right after the Akeda, he realizes, oh, maybe I got this news for an important reason. Maybe not that my son's going to marry her, but maybe it's just someone in that family. And when I go send my son to marry her, he's going to find the right lady. Meaning that's why I got the news at this time. He's seeing like the hand of God in things. Right? That's the first version, I think. Amar Lo Kodesh Baruch Hu, here it's God speaking. And he says, already she was born. Why doesn't it say already in the first version, only in the second version? So I had a chap like this, that maybe, just maybe, and I think it's a good idea, is that when it's God speaking, God doesn't make mistakes. And therefore, he's telling Avram Avinu, like through prophecy, she was already born. 11 years ago, I already have the girl for you. Don't worry, don't go searching. But when he hears good news from a distant land, it's not from God. It's not from God. Someone comes by, right? Like on his sheep or whatever, on his donkey, camel, whatever it is. And he says, hey, you should know you have a distant family member who just had a kid, which them a mazel tov. Oh, you're Avram, yeah. She was just born. But let me tell you something. If it's a human being, human beings make mistakes. Human beings, right, could be that this guy heard she was born, and she says she's born right now. So Avram Avinu thinks she was born right now. But it could be wrong. This is just what Avram Avinu heard, that she's born now. And so he's going to wait 3 years, right? Because there's no chance of marrying her. Now on the way, maybe he doesn't think she's going to be the actual mate to Yitzhak. He just thinks he heard her birth, and in the pursuit of her, which is what she's supposed to do, but not until at least she's 3, but in the pursuit of her, he'll find the right one, right? Eliezer doesn't know the name of the girl or her age, or because Avram Avinu didn't think that he's going to be married to Taka, that one. She was just born. But okay, in the pursuit of her, you'll find the right one. That's what he assumed. I think something along those lines. Okay, now let's look at Rashi again. And let's skip the calculation in the middle and read it straight. Because although there's commas here, I don't think there were commas in the original Rashi. All right, Kareshik above Ramara when he came from Aramaria already, right, not on the mountain, but when he came back from it, Nisbaser Shanoda Rivka. He was informed, like the first opinion, not from God, but he heard good news that Rivka was born. Uboy beperik noiled Rivka, and at that time Rivka was born, meaning that's what he heard, that at that time Rivka was born. He heard that. So he waited 3 years until he could get married to her. Now, why is Rashi saying this now? Where's this verse? This verse is at the moment when they're 60, when he's 60, and he's going to have kids, right, in Toldos. Why not say this way earlier when Avram, let's say, finds out, when the Parsha tells us, oh yeah, Rivka was born. In fact, that's where I originally quickly looked for the Rashi until, oh yeah, it's not there. This is out of place. This is much later. We have a rule in Rashi. He brings the first place he's going to write it. The reason is because here it says 40 years. Meaning, if Avraham Avinu heard that this girl was born, so go right now. Go right now. The reason is because he was told she was just born. And so he's going to wait 3 years. Meaning Rashi's bothered, why wait 3 years? Send right now the shliach to go get her. And the answer is, he's explaining to you, this is because Avram was told she was just born. Was she just born? No. No. You're going to find out that no, of course not. Why? Because the Torah itself is going to tell you it's a Nara. Rashi understood that. And Rashi, when he's explaining the whole parsha, is under the assumption that she's a Nara. He didn't think that you'd misread this Rashi so badly. And maybe, by the way, there was some textual, misprints, or someone changed something because they misunderstood a Rashi. I don't know, could be. But even if you don't change the Rashi, I think this is a very easy way to read the Rashi. And it makes everything make sense. You don't have to rely on anything else now. And once again, it's very good. Rashi picks the opinion that he heard just now that she was born from a person, not from God. Okay, so now let's go back to this Mishnah Seifrim. So I want to say as follows. The Mishnah Seifrim, right, we pointed out before that what? Because he didn't hear about her birth, right, the father, Besuel, didn't hear about the birth, so therefore a miracle was done for her. What got her to get a miracle? What's going on here? So I think, there's an interesting thing as follows. I think there's a lot of overlap here with, let's say, Lot. And by the way, it could be interesting that Avram brought Lot thinking that maybe his son would eventually marry, Lot was a cousin or something, so like the son of a daughter of a cousin. Maybe he thought Lot would give birth to a girl that his son would... Anyway, so it could be that Lot and Betuel have a lot overlap. First of all, they're both going to sleep with the daughters. Lot actually, not that he knew, he was made drunk, right? There's a little bit of a lie there. And Betuel was eventually going to sleep with his daughter, right? That's why he's trying to get the extra time, so that he asked for extra time so that maybe he could have his way with her. I don't know. Also, they're going to defile the daughters for the law of land, meaning Lot is going to throw the daughters to the community. And once again, Besuel is going to be intimate with this girl because that's the minhag. That's what he's going to do. And it could be because he's king. It's going to look weird if he doesn't follow the rule. Now, angels stop them both, right? Lot, he wants to give the girls, and the angels, they pull him back in, and they blind the people, right? That's the story of Stoim. And over here, the angel kills him, right? And in both cases, the girls are going to be now leaving the city. Now, both he and Avram are going to have children, I would argue, anew at this time. What do I mean? Okay, I think that you could read the Mishnah Seifrim like this. All right, you ready? Now, sadly, the Mishnah Seifrim does not really have very much commentary at all. And so it could be lots of rabbis didn't really see it. It's not part of the tradition. I don't know exactly how that works, but there's very little to work with this Mishnah Seifrim. But my one big question, why does she deserve a nace, a miracle, because the father didn't hear? Like, it sounds so funny. So I want to say like this, that the mother had given birth to her, and he didn't hear. It's not just he didn't hear for 3 days. He didn't hear for 11 years. For 11 years, he did not know he had a daughter. Somehow, word gets out that he has a daughter. At the time of the Akedah, it gets out. Hashem needs it to get out that this girl was born to him. Now, maybe he doesn't come and run and see. He's a girl born. Like, he's not going to come and see her. You think that he's going to see his whole family? The Parsha says that when she sees Eliezer and gives the rings, she runs to her mother's house. And Rashi says, yeah, because she would live with her mother. She had a special house. This is where she went. So it could be the father really didn't know much to do with his daughter. So therefore, maybe she was already born. He never found out. Now, 3 years go by, and now there's talk about marriage, and now he's coming along and saying, what's going on? A 3-year-old, I thought she's 3. She looks a lot older. And the mother's saying, yeah, she's 3. There's something, miracle happened, and she grew up fast, like the Gur Aryeh. Right, we're going to use the Gur Aryeh here a little bit, just a little bit. So this is what the mother said, maybe. Now, why does she deserve a miracle? Because she lived locked up in her house. She didn't go out. She didn't go to her father. Her father's a king. She could be a princess. She didn't do that. Why? Because she understood maybe how bad the people were in this area, and she didn't want to be involved. And therefore, she deserved a miracle. Now it makes sense why she deserved a miracle to save her from such a thing. And by the way, it makes sense that Avram heard this mistaken report that she was just born, meaning everyone thought she was just born. Everyone. Except maybe the mother and the girl. They knew the truth. But otherwise, maybe no one else knew. And now the Mishnah Seifrim, and now every single opinion, Rashi, every single opinion is going to be that she's going to be 14 at the time when she gets married. Now, I'll tell you, I did not see this before coming up with this vort, but I felt very good. The Netziv does not say this vort, sadly. I didn't see it anyway, but he says something amazing. A diuk in the Parsha that works very well with what I just said, because I thought what I was saying is pretty stretchy for the Mishnah Seifrim, and I just happened to see this. So he says, the verse says, the verse says, V'ish lo yada, a man did not know her. So he says, forget about the physical intimacy. He says, no, men didn't know about her. She'ein la davar imam nashim. She wasn't speaking to men. Oisa besula lo yatza ada yoim l'shoiv. This girl did not go out to get water except for this day. Meaning, if I'm gonna stretch the Netziv a little bit, meaning no men saw her. They didn't know about her. Her father didn't know about her. People didn't know about her. She was living at home, locked up. She didn't want to be associated with this world, with these horrible people. And on that day, Eliezer, whatever it is, she has to go out for whatever reason, and Eliezer's going to see her, and, etc., etc. Now, Rav Shimon Shawab and the Rebbe, they give a different answer, which I think is also good, and I think it works well with what I'm saying, but they just say simply, yes, she was 14. This idea that she was 3 means because at the time of the Akedah, she was imbued with like a new soul, and so then she turned like 3, like spiritually, like with this new soul, but really she was 14. And she had the experiences and she had a regular soul, but she got this extra soul at the time of the Akedah, meaning Yitzhak succeeded his test. He became more spiritual, like we said before, like disconnected from his body. And so because he was going to marry Rivka, she needed to be more holy. So she got this extra zip at that time. So she was 3, but not literally 3, but spiritually 3. Now, by the way, although that sounds funny, you find many times where it'll talk about someone who's, let's say, very holy, like Sarah, like, when she was 100, she was like 20. When she was 20, she was like 7, meaning in terms of purity, whatever that means. But you see that sometimes we look at years in like funny ways, that like, oh, when she was like this, she was like this, okay. Maybe that's a little bit of a support to this idea. But anyway, I think now we see that it could be that there's really no opinion that she was 3. This is a misunderstanding. And very few people actually put it forward that she was 3, except for Rashi. But I've shown you that it could be Rashi's just putting forward that Avram thought she was 3, but not that she actually was 3. This is a misreading, I would argue, of Rashi. But you don't have to be so bad, because a lot of rabbis, I don't know if they misread it, because many times the Rishonim will say this is their opinion and argue on it, even if it's not exactly the other opinion. But okay, we'll leave it here. Let me know, first of all, A, you like the idea, you don't like the idea, or B, or other topics. I love these interesting topics, and it was nice to work on and have clarity. Thank you so much.